Have you ever wondered why sports teams like the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins changed their names and logos recently? Some Americans were taught that these terms were derogatory, but historically, they were not meant to be offensive. This is significant because these terms convey an essential hidden message that the government wanted to prevent newer generations of Americans from passing on. I will provide the answers to this question and more in this video. Let's get it. Between the 1500s and the 1700s, American Indians used the term Redskin in a neutral sense to distinguish between different tribes based on their skin tones. While most individuals had dark brown complexions, Redskin referred to those with a slightly lighter shade of brown. The word Oklahoma comes from the Algonquin phrase Oklahoma, which means red people or red-skinned people. While various indigenous groups used this term, it was explicitly associated with the Delaware people who lived in eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, southern New York State, and New York City. The term Oklahoma was mainly adopted into the Choctaw language in the early 1700s, several decades before Oklahoma became the 46th state on November 16, 1907. Even up to this time, the term Redskin was still not offensive. In 1869, America saw the emergence of professional football, which was a combination of rugby and soccer. The sports league was later called the National Football League, or the NFL, in 1919. During its earliest years, American Indians of dark brown complexions played pivotal roles in the success of multiple football teams within the league, like Charles Follis in 1902 with the Shelby Blues, and Charles Baker in 1906 with the Akron Indians, and Robert Ruby Marshall in 1919 with the Rock Island Independents, and Frederick Douglass Fritz Pollard, also with the Akron Indians in 1920, but then called Akron Pros later on. And he also was the first head coach of American Indian descent in the NFL from 1922 to 1937. I'll get into why here shortly. From 1902 to 1933, American Indians of dark brown complexions were dominating the NFL in passing, receiving, and rushing until it all came to an immediate halt in 1933 when so-called colored men were banned from playing in the league. On July 5th, 1933, NFL's Boston Braves owner, George Marshall, announced in the Hartford Courant newspaper that his team would now be known as the Boston Redskins. Plenty of people would tell you that the owner changed the name of the team because the Redskins had an Indian head coach at that time. But the owner corrected them in the article by stating, quote, "So much confusion has been caused by a football team wearing the same name as the National League Baseball Club that a change appeared to be absolutely necessary. The fact that we have in our head coach, Lone Star Dietz, an Indian, together with several Indian players, has not, as may be suspected, inspired me to select the name Redskins." That year, he moved the team to Fenway Park. Here's a picture of the Boston Redskins roster that was taken in 1934. Look closely at the photo and remember that the owner claimed that he had, quote, "several Indian players" on his roster. This is the new coach he just hired, William Henry Lone Star Dietz, a white man who claimed to be a member of the Sioux Nation, but later turned out to be not an American Indian whatsoever by his family members. I'll leave you to consider who the other Indian players he's referring to in this picture might be. While you look around the image, be sure to remember the logo that was on their jerseys in 1934. Here is the logo of that year from their official website. You can point out the noticeable differences here. But let's continue because we'll return to this later. 3 years later, the team owner George Marshall moved the Redskins to Washington, D.C., where they became known as the Washington Redskins and adopted a new logo in 1937. In 1946, American Indians with dark brown complexions were welcomed back into the NFL. At that time, they were referred to as colored, Negro, and black, but they managed to overcome the pervasive racism that existed while successfully dominating all records across the NFL during that era. At that time, the term Redskin was not considered offensive. Additionally, English language dictionaries widely used in the 1950s and 1960s made no mention of the term Redskin being viewed as disparaging to American Indians. For example, the 1952 edition of the Universal Dictionary of the English Language described Redskin as a Native American Indian, a red man, but does not refer to the word being offensive. The American College Dictionary of 1956, the Grosset-Webster Dictionary of 1957, and Webster's New International Dictionary, unabridged second edition of 1957, all define Redskin as a North American Indian, again, with no indication that the term was considered offensive. In the American Heritage Dictionary of the American Language of 1969, produced more than a decade later, the exact definition is given, but with the qualification that the term is informal, which may be a recognition that Redskin was phasing out of everyday usage by the end of the 1960s. In 1958, the Crayola Company introduced 15 new colors to its 64 crayon collection, one of which was Indian red. This crayon was said to represent the skin complexion of American Indians, and parents used it as a conversation starter with their children to discuss American Indian culture. It was not until the 1983 editions of Webster's Third International Dictionary, 9th edition, that the Merriam-Webster Company, the country's leading publisher of so-called serious dictionaries, added the cautionary phrase, quote, usually taken to be offensive, to its previous definition of Redskin, which was simply a North American Indian. In contrast, the same dictionaries from the 1950s and 1960s indicate that the word nigger is understood to be clearly offensive and derogatory. And even during the Jim Crow era, calling someone black to their face was considered insulting. Until 1970, it mysteriously became acceptable to use. But there was a consensus that the term Redskin was merely a synonym for North American Indian and was not regarded as an offensive label. So, what led to the shift in the perception of the word Redskin? Why did it become considered offensive in the early 1980s when it wasn't viewed that way before? Even though the ban was lifted in 1946, the Washington Redskins were the last team to reintegrate. They purposely did not draft or trade for an American Indian player with a dark brown complexion until it was forced to do so politically by then President John F. Kennedy, being as though Washington, D.C. was majority populated by so-called colored people at this time in 1961. The civil rights movement was picking up steam, so activists, politicians, sports journalists, and even Kennedy's Interior Secretary pressed owner George Marshall to change his ways, or he would not be able to use the new D.C. Stadium, later called Robert F. Kennedy Stadium, for his Washington Redskins NFL team. In 1962, team owner George Marshall made a significant decision when the Redskins selected Syracuse running back Ernie Davis as the first pick in the draft. Although Davis was later traded, the Redskins went on to sign 5 American Indian players, including future Hall of Famer Bobby Mitchell. Bobby stated to reporters that he personally never had any problems with George Marshall, but he did encounter considerable hostility from fans, particularly among the so-called black community.
We would come to Washington and beat them up, and only because they had no blacks, so we played even harder.
Today at age 77, Bobby Mitchell is retired from the Redskins front office, a former superstar receiver with more than 14,000 combined yards in the air and ground. Did you want to come here?
No, it never crossed my mind I'd ever be a Redskin.
He got his start after the University of Illinois for the Cleveland Browns. He was in the backfield with Jim Brown.
When I finally came here, it never dawned on me, and I don't know why. Washington is in the South.
He continued at a Pro Bowl pace once he was traded to D.C., but when off the field, it's no exaggeration to say that Bobby Mitchell caught hell in a segregated Washington, D.C.
I couldn't go in restaurants. Barbershops, the same thing you'd get across the Mason-Dixon line.
He played for about 10 years in the NFL. There were 4 Pro Bowls. Twice he led the league in receiving. And how about those 83 touchdowns?
And Bruce, you have to remember one other thing. I don't know if people ever even think about it. Bobby Mitchell wasn't loved by the black folks. He wasn't their class. So there was a lot of things my kids couldn't do and my wife couldn't do. The bourgeoisie type. So I got that going against me, and I got the whites saying, I don't like you, and the names.
In 1983, Bobby Mitchell was voted into the NFL Hall of Fame. He got more than 70% of the vote on the very first ballot. Would it have been okay for you to just be an average player, a role model, or did you have to be great?
You know what? The guys who should have gotten that question from you were the other black guys who came in with me. Because have you heard anything about them? It would be interesting to see what was happening to them at the same time. I never heard a complaint. And every day I'm getting kicked. Every day, wherever I went.
And you were a star player.
And I still think it was because I was the star player.
The discussion about the Washington Redskins name being offensive to some people gained public attention in the early 1990s. In 1992, after the Redskins reached the Super Bowl, some activists staged protests against the team's name. The then owner Jack Ken Cook stated, quote, "The name Redskins would not be changed. To me, the name represents pride, courage, adventure, daring do, and bravery." In 2020, following the George Floyd protests, various aspects of society that were deemed offensive were closely scrutinized, largely due to the heightened attention from social media and the Black Lives Matter movement. As a result, the name and logo of the Washington Redskins faced considerable backlash and were ultimately removed. The team temporarily adopted the name Washington Football Team until a new name could be established. Additionally, the team's owner, Dan Snyder, was already facing criticism for fostering a negative workplace environment and for multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. The team was eventually called the Washington Commanders. Millions of fans of the team and the NFL were unhappy with the name change and expressed their opinions on the matter. This included me and several politicians urging the government to intervene and reinstate the name. It was noted that the Washington Redskins had received the blessing of American Indians, both in the past and currently, to use the name and logo. On November 13, 2024, Senator Steve Daines of Montana criticized the NFL for its blatant censorship and urged the return of Washington's previous logo. Here's the video.
Madam President, I rise today to talk about the need to right a wrong. The National Football League and the Washington Commanders must do more to honor the Commanders' Native American heritage, as powerfully symbolized by the team's former iconic logo. And they must commit meant to never, ever again censor it or degrade it. Here's the story. This is a photograph from the 1960s of Blackie Wetzel and Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Blackie Wetzel was a member of the Blackfeet Nation in Montana and served his people and the country in many roles throughout his life, including chairman of the Blackfeet tribe and president of the National Congress of American Indians. In 1971, Blackie met with George Herbert Allen, who was then the head coach and the general manager of Washington's premier professional sports franchise, the Washington Redskins. Knowing that Coach Allen admired and supported Native Americans, Blackie Wetzel encouraged him to replace the team's R logo with something that represented Indian country. Blackie brought Coach Allen pictures of prominent Native American figures, including Blackfeet Chief Two Guns Whitecalf, who is pictured here on this poster board beside me. On behalf of the team, Coach Allen adopted the now legendary logo that became the symbol of this storied franchise and among one of the most popular in league history. Make no mistake, this logo was inspired, it was envisioned by Blackie Wetzel as a tribute to Native Americans. By the way, it's not a caricature. It is a depiction of pride and of strength, a depiction of courage, of honor. In fact, as Blackie Wetzel said in 2002, it made us all so proud to have an Indian on a big-time team. And I will tell you, support from the Wetzel family, the Whitecalf family, and the Blackfeet Nation remains as strong as ever today. In fact, the Blackfeet Nation recently expressed their, and I quote, wholehearted support for the logo and urged the NFL and the Commanders to restore it to a place of prominence and honor. In fact, I'll never forget Don Wetzel when he came to me 3 years ago. In fact, 3 years ago this very week, to share his father's remarkable legacy and to tell me directly the logo still mattered to him, to his family, even after the team stopped using it. Now, for context, the contributions of our nation's Native American tribes to our country's culture and heritage is beyond dispute. And this includes their service in the armed forces. Do you realize that Native Americans serve our country in uniform at the highest percentage of any ethnic group? They are warriors for our country. And we honor them, and we honor all veterans this week. Madam President, any franchise should be proud to be associated with Native American heritage. But unfortunately, in February of this year, the NFL deliberately censored the logo on its official X account, as you can see here. They did this when honoring previous Super Bowl winners, and the Commanders are selling a shirt even today that does the same. You might ask what I mean by censoring the logo. Well, in the case of the NFL, they photoshopped graphics to cover up the logo on the team's helmet, as you can see here. This is John Riggins. It's a picture of one of the great legends of Washington, D.C. And in the case of a shirt that was honoring Darryl Green, the logo is completely removed from the helmet as if it were some sort of obscene image. Now, this blatant censorship is outrageous. It's offensive, not to mention hypocritical. Players wore the very same shirt in pregame warm-ups with one major difference. You'll see here that the logo is proudly displayed, as it should be. You can see the logo. So why couldn't fans share in the same enthusiasm by purchasing a shirt with a legendary player and a legendary logo? And I've got to tell you, the censorship of honorable Native imagery certainly does not promote diversity, equity, or inclusion. Now, let me be clear. For anyone who's been following this issue for the past few months knows this. I am not calling for the return of the former team name. Let me say that again, because there's folks who twist this. I am not calling for the return of the former team name, which had become increasingly controversial, especially in Indian country. But unlike the former name, the logo was rarely a subject of controversy, and in fact was never alleged to be disparaging during the trademark disputes against the team that spanned many years. And while some individuals might object to teams featuring any tribal imagery, however honorable and realistic, there's no doubt in my mind that the overwhelming majority of fans in Indian country and beyond believe that Washington's former logo is honorable and it's a point of pride. Look no further than the Blackfeet Nation's chairman of the tribal council writing this letter supporting the logo. It was dated September 23rd, 2024. It was therefore wrong and simply unnecessary for the NFL and the team's former ownership to discard the logo and abandon its nearly 90-year connection to Indian country. Now, the good news is that the new Commanders owners have taken some positive steps since the May committee hearing on legislation related to RFK Stadium here in Washington. I applaud them for honoring Blackie Wetzel with a permanent memorial at Northwest Stadium. And I'm told that censoring the logo on the Darryl Green shirt was an oversight, and it won't happen again when other Washington legends are featured on shirts in the future. It's also my understanding the Commanders are continuing to have good faith conversations with the Wetzel family on potentially allowing a new foundation to be created to use the iconic logo to draw attention to critical issues facing Indian country. I sincerely hope these conversations result in the team taking additional action to honor the Blackfeet Nation's contributions to the team's history and, frankly, the rich Native American heritage surrounding our nation's capital. I also strongly encourage the NFL to allow sales of vintage merchandise featuring the Native American logo where market demand exists. And if the Commanders want to occasionally wear the throwback uniform with the classic helmet, the NFL should fully support it. Can you imagine the Cowboys star once again lined up helmet to helmet with the Blackfeet chief? Now, I know enough about marketing and public relations to realize the NFL needs assistance and assurances that its corporate sponsors and media partners won't protest and create a stir where such sales to resume. So I'd like to publicly call on the NFL sponsors to hear the support of the Blackfeet Nation, to hear the support of the Wetzel family, to hear the thunderous support of fans across the country for honoring the logo, for allowing NFL-sanctioned merchandise sales featuring it, and for supporting Indian country along the way. Corporate sponsors, I urge you to let the NFL know you recognize the Native American logo was never the problem and that you believe it should be celebrated, not censored, moving forward. Madam President, I'm not the first senator to come to this floor to draw attention to Washington's football franchise or make demands in the context of extending the lease for RFK Stadium. Senators Harry Reid, Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, among others, use this platform to demand that the team change its name. Well, today, on behalf of the Blackfeet Nation of Montana, and no doubt with the support of millions of football fans across the country, I come to the Senate floor to say our culture overcorrected in 2020. The NFL overcorrected. The team's previous ownership overcorrected. Sponsors overcorrected. And we are still seeing shocking displays of censorship of an honorable logo as a result. But now can be the day of righting that wrong. As we celebrate Native American Heritage Month this November, what better time to do it than now? What better time to restore one of the NFL's greatest logos ever to the, quote, as the Blackfeet tribe wrote in their letter, a place of prominence and honor, as hoped for and called for by the Blackfeet Nation of Montana. Madam President, I yield back my time.
Now, I just want to point out that the 1972 Washington Redskins Indian logo was not created by or descriptively designed by Blackie Wetzel. It was merely inspired by him, meaning that he just provided the team's owner images of American Indian leaders that he was associated with to help influence a change from the R logo into an Indian logo in 1972. Also, the 1972 logo was not a direct replica of Chief Two Guns White Calf, but a picture of him was said to have inspired it. In these images, you can see that he is an American Indian with a dark brown complexion. As you can see in this image, the Redskins have been using an image of an Indian as its logo since 1932. The only time it didn't was when the owner was forced to reintegrate the team with players of American Indian descent, who were then misclassified as coloreds and Negroes, and now reclassified with misnomers like African Americans and Black Americans. I'm just here to make you think.
Slow down. Yeah. Sub up, light up.